Welcome to this Getting Started in HTML course. What I want to do in this introductory lecture primarily is just answer that one simple question: what is HTML? But in so doing, I'm going to lead into, quite naturally, an answer to the second question there, which is, why do we need a standards-based approach? Because what I've done in this course is to take a standards-based approach, and I want to justify that. Having done that, then I'll give you a quick overview of what you're going to learn in the course. So let's go into that question first. What is HTML? And it has a remarkably simple answer. This is taken from the World Wide Web Standards documentation on basics of HTML. HTML stands for, as you probably are aware, the Hypertext Markup Language. And what is it? Well, it's simply a language to describe the contents of web documents. Nothing more than that. That's important because what you won't see in this lecture course, at least until the very end, is any hint of styling information. You certainly won't see any code in the executable code in the HTML documents, and in the advanced lectures which follow in a separate course to this one, neither will you see any code there in the HTML documents. HTML is pure and simple a language for describing the contents of web documents. And how does it do that? Well, again, it's remarkably simple. It uses tags to divide the document up into meaningful elements. That's two keywords there, and if you've got those two keywords, you've got the basics of HTML. Tags delimit meaningful elements. It is important to get that distinction between tags and elements clear in your mind. Often in some of the textbooks they're confused, and some of the online articles also confused. They're quite distinct things. The tags are things to delimit a meaningful element, and an element can have sub-elements. So here we're going to do in our document what I did with the text in the presentation, which is to emphasize one of the words, the key terms, which is element. So I've put another element within an element there, and that element has a content of elements. So that's it. There's a lot more to learn still, but that's the basics. A language to describe the contents of the web, and it does this by using tags to divide the document up into meaningful elements. And we can give an example of a very simple web page having done that. So here's our first example of an HTML file, although I hasten to add this is not, as it stands, valid HTML, or at least not a valid HTML document. We need to put some more material in there, not a lot, but a little bit more material in there to turn it into a valid HTML document. You'll find out what's necessary in the lecture after next, but this does work modulo some doubts about how individual browsers will actually render it, which is one of the reasons why it's not a valid HTML document. But I've got my marked up content. I've identified two key terms I want to emphasize, and I have identified this as a paragraph. So the P tags are delimiting an element, which is a paragraph. So that's what I mean, a browser to interpret that as a paragraph. So let's take a look at that in our browser. So I've opened up a browser, and indeed from this you learn something else new this lecture, that in fact it is quite normal to end up naked after you've had a drink. So for those of you that are used to having a glass of wine, next time you go to a crowded restaurant, be a little bit cautious about how much you drink. Let's open the file that we've had, and it's rendered in my browser. No formatting there, but it has rendered as a single paragraph with the two keywords I want emphasized. Why is it important to describe the content of your web documents? Well, again, the W3C view on this is that it's to enable user agents to read and interpret those documents. The reason why you need to have a standard way of marking up the documents is because those user agents can be created by anybody. There are a number of well-known user agents such as Firefox, Safari, Opera and so forth, all produced by different parties. Also, some of the rendering engines are common to a number of different browsers. But they can be created by anybody, and if you look at any article about web browsers, there are many of those. Even more important, the web browsers are not the only kind of user agents. They certainly, all web browsers are user agents, but there are some additional ones which, as a builder of web documents, you need to be aware of. And the obvious ones are the search engines, the indexing tools used by search engines and so forth, which need to be able to read and interpret your web document. So in a sense, I've now answered the question as to why standards are important, because if there is a confusion about how to interpret a document, or people can present the same content different ways in different documents, then there's going to be some disparity in how browsers interpret the information in your web document. More importantly, how general user agents might interpret that information. So if you don't adhere to a standards-based approach, then you will be missing most of the tricks of search engine optimization, because the search engines may well not fully understand the content that you have in your document and so won't index it properly. So in a sense, that's the main thing. It's getting consistency of interpretation of your documents. There are other arguments for it, but that's the main thing. Let's take a quick look here, and this is a commercially built website for a school. It's a service offered to websites, and here it is in Firefox. Looks quite nice. There's all the content you need. It also offers a service to the parents of schools that are parents of children that are already at the school, with some additional content you can get when you log in. But here it is in Safari. It's a real muddle. And if you're a parent looking for a school and all you've got on your machine is Safari, then you're going to take a quick look at this and you can't see too much about what the headlines are. It's a real jumble. And if you look at the source of this website, it's clearly generated by a tool, and that tool is clearly not standards compliant, and so the behavior of the website in different browsers is not predictable. It's gone seriously wrong here, and this is a mainstream website provided by a fairly expensive organization. So to make sure that your document renders correctly as expected in every conceivable user agent, provided those user agents are in their sense, in their turn, standards compliant, you need to adhere to these standards. And most of in fact all of the well-known browsers are standards compliant. So make sure that you are not open to these kinds of issues. So quickly now, what are you going to learn in this course? Well, let's go through a little overview of the structure of the course. So let's have a quick look at the course structure using this rather nice mind mapping tool in 3D mode, not because it adds anything, but just because it looks nice. So HTML, what we're going to do first of all is just introduce some basic concepts of HTML and a little bit of the history of HTML. That's going to be useful primarily because you will see lots of old style documents, and I want to make you aware of some of the things you might see and why they're there and why you don't need to worry about them anymore, because HTML5 is somewhat simplified. The next thing to look at is going to be the structure of the document, and that'll form a chapter with some main parts, some background, the doc types, again simple now, but there's some history there which you need to be aware of, and the document object model, which is then going to be broken down into elements, and I'll introduce elements at a fairly broad level to start off with. Once we've seen the introduction of the elements and the basic division of an HTML document into a head and a body, then we can start to talk about semantics, because HTML is all about giving your documents semantics. It's not about anything else. It's just about giving your document semantics. Having done that, then we can start to look at some of the things which you need to be aware of as you move on to a more advanced course. And my choice in an advanced course would be to include more material about validating HTML, more material about accessibility, and what we'll do in this course is to lay the foundations, a uniform foundation for starting to style your documents. The styling does not belong in HTML. Again, to say it one more time, HTML is about providing semantics to your document. You do the styling somewhere else, but we need to set things up a little bit to enable you to do some smart styling with cascading style sheets, which will, again, typically comes in a more advanced course. So one more quick spin just to enjoy the 3D mind map. You can even put a cool background on it, and thanks to Tony Buzan for introducing me and several million other people to mind maps in the I think early 1970s, and he's still going strong and doing all sorts of wonderful things. So what have we learned? One thing, this is their take-home message. There's some things about standards, there's a little bit about the content of the course, but the take-home message, I'll say again, HTML describes documents by using tags to divide the content into meaningful elements. It's not about styling, it's not about user interaction. You do both of those in different documents. HTML is simply about providing a semantics to a web document. Pure and simple. Use it as that and you won't go wrong.